Greetings duelists and welcome to another video. So as you guys already know, the WCQ season for 2023 has already begun. We're at our second week of regionals since the regionals season has started. And we've been seeing a lot of tractions with a lot of variants with different decks. Um, so as you guys already know, this is a very experimental format because after the release of Dune, a lot of people just have been wanting to perfect a lot of decks or just try out new strategies because we're technically in a new season. However, some people also want to improve their strategies and try to bolster with them and do well with what they think and know it's best for in the game. Um, I won't cover too much when it comes to the different decks that have been topping. There are other YouTubers that are already doing that. But what I will talk about in this particular video is what makes a deck suitable for me as a duelist specifically, and maybe my perspective can shine on your perspective, or maybe the viewpoints that I'm going to bring up with the deck that I'm playing are probably something that you can incorporate to yours. But without further ado, let's begin. So if you see in the spreadsheet, you already see that Vanquish Soul is not really high represented as a strategy, and that's the deck of choice that I've chosen for this format. Um, as you guys already know, or somebody, or people who have been watching my videos, they already know that the other deck that I've been piloting, at least on Dueling Book, is the Branded Chimera deck. So right now, these are the four decks that I have been piloting in locals throughout this entire season since this channel's inception. I've been playing at these decks at locals and at regionals and at other events, and I've done historically well with some of them, and some with them I did not. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to speak about what made me pick these decks in the first place, and then what made me pick these decks for now, and what is my stance on what is in this pie chart. Um, so when I first started with Tier Elements, I in this channel I started playing the deck, a Lunalight variant of it, and that was after the big flurry of hits that it received, which took it out of top tier contention. The hypothesis that I reached with the deck was that the deck was still powerful. The deck can still do stuff with its engine. However, it was kind of short-lived because the consistency of the deck is not super great, and the biggest issue with Tier Elements is it cannot play a lot of non-engine without risking consistency to the deck, because you lost a lot of cards that were functioning tools to the strategy. The Lunalight strategy was pretty cool. It did a lot of plays. I did top a few locals here and there. But overall, there were so many design flaws when it came to using the deck without the use of utility cards that didn't make the deck brick or fall into place. It was also a deck that was pretty much break the walls or bust. If you couldn't reach to your win condition or your strategy, the deck kind of fell apart. And another big outlier is the popularity of Dimension Shifter, or pretty much I guess I could just put Kashtira into this equation. But yeah, Kashtira being the dominant and popular force that it was, meant that I couldn't play tier as optimally without meeting up with the deck at least at a couple events, and like just be halted because of how pitiful the matchup is. And then we move on to the Scareclaw Adventure Kashtira deck. So what made me pick this deck for the format was pretty much a few criterias. The big criteria was that it was good against Dimensional Barrier and it was good against Dimension Shifter. And the Kashtira matchup was not really that hard for me because I played a lot of cards in the main deck that just was a hard counter to the Kashtira strategy. Not only that, but the deck had an incredibly high ceiling. I had a lot of recursion. The deck has a workflow of how the plays interact. It always had a game plan that could have adapted to many decks of the format, and that was something that it took me to a very level of success. I won the second Tropical Island Challenge, where with this deck I topped a couple events with it. And in the local scene, I've been topping almost every local, during the entire format, and the deck pretty much rewarded me from not only proper deck building standpoint, but player instability standpoint. It didn't matter almost what deck in the game I faced against. I almost found a way that I could play against it with this deck. But yeah, so what made me go away from Scareclaw is the popularity of Droll and Lockbird. As you guys already know, Droll and Lockbird was a very, very popular hand trap because the Manadium strategy just became very, very strong after the support from Dune. And a lot of people just feared the fact that we had a deck in the format that pretty much had a win condition and can play through most hand traps except Droll and Lockbird. And that was enough for people to warrant this card in the main deck. And that what made me move away from Scareclaw. After that, I went into playing the Rescue Ace deck. Similar to the Kashtira Scareclaw deck, it's a deck that doesn't really super hard lose to Shifter. Shifter does bother it, but not to a potential degree. It's also a deck that is a lot less impacted by Droll and Lockbird, and is also not impacted by Dimensional Barrier. So that was another criteria that I had with this deck that kind of made it playable for me. My issue with the deck was that it plays a lot of non-engine cards. I mean, my bad. A lot of engine requirements. And engine requirements are very needed in this deck because it's part of the deck's win condition. Extinguish, Contain, and Rescue, and cards like those. All of these cards. They're all needed in the Rescue Ace deck in order for the deck to function optimally. And outside of emergency, all these cards are pretty much bricks if you don't get your engine rolling. And I wasn't a fan of that because I had a very, very bad experience with just keep drawing into these engine requirements more than my engine cards. And that's what swayed me away from Rescue Ace. And now we move into Vanquish Soul. So similar to Rescue Ace, Vanquish Soul does have the issue that it does have engine requirements. However, the engine requirements for Vanquish Soul are a lot lesser. And another thing that I really liked about Vanquish Soul is another deck that doesn't lose to Barrier, unless you're going for the XYZ strategies, which is not super pivotal for the deck's success. The deck isn't super weak to Shifter. Some builds also play Shifter themselves. And Droll and Lockbird can hurt you, but the deck has a lot of ways to play around Droll and Lockbird and also have a game plan for your opponent if you get drolled. And those are three criteria that already solidified my view for playing Vanquish Soul. But Vanquish Soul has another issue. And the issue that Vanquish Soul has is that the ceiling of the deck is not higher than other decks, like in the format. Like if we look at the pie chart right here, and we look at the top decks right now, like Chimera, Unchained, Kashtira, and Vanadium, these are all decks that are stronger than Vanquish Soul with their engine. And like that's something I covered on my last Vanquish Soul deck profile. I spoke how I faced multiple Vanadium players, and like the matchup was just really horrendous for me because I didn't have the right utility cards for that matchup, and that matchup is really very strong against multiple hand traps and a couple of non-utility cards if they go first. But yeah, like the Chimera matchup is also not favorable for us because their win condition involves like ripping cards out of your hand, and it also has cards that interact with your cards, and they have a very higher engine than my deck. But why am I playing Vanquish Soul and not playing these other 4 to 5 decks that are like topping more consistently than it? Because if you look at the Chimera deck, this deck is weak to Draw, is weak to Shifter, is weak to Dimensional Barrier. If you look at Unchained, Unchained is not hurt by Draw, and Dimensional Barrier doesn't also hurt it. However, Shifter could hurt it to some degree because the weird part about Unchained is that the newer cards that help Unchained's like win condition and they bolster the engine and the strategy and raise the ceiling are cards that are actually weak to Dimension Shifter. The Unchained strategy itself is not weak to Shifter if you take away the cards from Dune. But the cards from Dune make this deck a lot weaker to Shifter. If you look at Kashtira, Kashtira is not hurt by Shifter and is a deck that can play around Draw. However, in the past format before this more open one, like a lot of people were prepared for Kashtira. Like a lot of people were playing a lot of cards that just hard counter the deck. Stuff like Book of Moon, Book of Eclipse, like Triple Tactic Talents. Nibiru is another card that has been played in people's main decks and side decks that also really hurt Kashtira. Evenly Matched is another card that also hurts Kashtira. And the Vanadium deck, I already brought up that Vanadium is a really hard matchup for us. And Vanadium is a deck that, like, I would say it has the highest ceiling out of every deck right here. However, I'll go back to saying it, like the deck is weak to Barrier if it's done on the right cards. The deck is very weak to Shifter if they don't know how to play against it properly. And the deck is also weak to Draw and Lockbird. And it's kind of a tough call in this format because the reason those cards have been played in the first place is because of the existence of how strong Vanadium is. However, we're now in a format where people have to shift their utility cards every week. Otherwise, you're going to see this more unorthodox strategies like doing very well. Like if you see here, Rescue Ace is also doing very well. Like at events, you'll see that the branded Chimera deck is the deck that has been doing the most success. And this deck is very weak to some cards that were common in the format, like Ash Blossom. This deck is also weak to Shifter. Draw also hurts this deck. But yeah, I just wanted to make this video because despite how unpopular Vanquish Soul is, and despite how not as strong as the other decks is, this deck is more resilient to a lot of other utility cards that can really hold back the decks that are doing well. And like I value like the position of a deck that can play through most cards more than how strong the deck is. Like if we need to beat the decks with the higher ceiling and the decks that have like the better matchup, we pretty much have to dedicate our main and our side deck to adapt to those decks. Um, and for the time being, I'll probably kind of keep playing Vanquish Soul until like I find another strategy that can do well, or I could take the risk and just go back to the Scareclaw like Kashtira Adventure deck. But the biggest risk out of me doing that means that I'll be losing to cards like Droll and Lockbird, and if people's like for example, now that we see Vanadium actually topping events like at some degree, and we see the Branded Chimera deck also doing well, that's going to make people want to play Droll again, like more in the main deck. And so it's a big risk if you like take a high ceiling deck, but you know that you're just going to lose to some utility cards. Um, but it's also a risk if you play like a low ceiling deck and you don't face the right matchups and you don't have the right utility. And yeah, that's pretty much like it. I don't think there's a wrong choice on what deck you play this format. The only choice that is wrong is if you don't prepare for the other decks and you don't are not knowledgeable enough against them. Um, but yeah, that's pretty much it from me. I hope you found this video informative. Keep practicing and keep dueling.